Good day, everybody. I'm Roger Hellhag, a partner at Rud Pedersen Public Affairs and head of our defense and security area in Sweden. I would like to warmly welcome all of you to this discussion about Sweden's defense plans that are now finally at the table of Parliament. We would also like to thank the panelists for sharing their insights about the intense and detailed process that has preceded now the imminent decisions. And with this, I would like to give the word to our moderator today, Marika Grisel. But lastly, we have to say that two of our panelists, Kalle Olsson and Allan Widman, have some technical issues still. We start off talking with Paul Jonsson, and then we will have them on board as those issues are solved. So, Marika, over to you, please.
Thank you, Roger. Nice to be with you. We are discussing an enormous increase in the defense budget here in Sweden, and it will be decided very soon in the Parliament. And as we are still waiting for both Kalle and Olsson and Allan Widman, me and Paul have discussed that you, Paul, will give us an idea of the time frame at the moment when this will be tabled in the Parliament, and also maybe give an idea of the fact that we, as many other countries in the world, have now enormous costs regarding the pandemic. We have also other costs of infrastructure, of climate change, and so on. And how was the discussion going in the Parliament and in the different groups when you came to this big increase in the budget? So please, Paul, go ahead while we're waiting for the others.
Thank you very much, Marika, and thank you very much to Rud Pedersen for this kind and timely invitation to comment the forthcoming defense bill in the Swedish Parliament. Let me just say as a way of introduction that I don't think there's any decisions that the Parliament takes that we do in so close deliberations as the defense decisions. This has actually been an ongoing process since January 2017, when the Minister of Defense gave a mission to the Swedish Defense Commission to start drafting a proposal for the forthcoming defense decision. Then it produced one report called Motståndskraft or Resilience. It was about civil defense, and that was presented in December 2017. And then its final report came in May 2019, and that's called Värnkraft, and that focused on the measures taken to strengthen the armed forces. After that, we had a rather divisive year in Swedish defense and security policy, I should say. We've been bickering a little bit about the budget and how the proposal should be drafted and so forth. But a bill was presented to the Swedish Parliament on the 15th of October from the government. It was supported by the Liberal Party and the Center Party, the Social Democrats, and the Green Party, and we are, as of now, in deliberations on the positions of it, and we will have a debate about it on the 14th of December in the chamber, and I expect us to reach a decision on the 15th of December connected to this. And there will actually be two parliamentary decisions, so to speak, one on the security policy aspect of it, and that we take in deliberations with the Foreign Affairs Committee, and then on the one on the military side of it as well. Just a word then also on how the pandemic has played out on the defense expenditures and so forth. You're absolutely right. This is a 40% increase in defense expenditures up to 2025. That's a very substantial increase. How has the pandemic been playing out on it? Well, we saw last time around during the economic recession in 2008 that there was a slash and burn on defense expenditures all over Europe. But the debate we've been having in Sweden actually been if it should be a 40% increase or if it should be more. I think there is an awareness among all political parties that the security environment has fundamentally changed and deteriorated, I think that also the pandemic causes an awareness among the public that even unexpected things could happen, and that you need to have strengthen the resilience in your society. And the last point on the pandemic as well, which I think is important. I think a lot of people were actually grateful for the support the Swedish Armed Forces gave to the Swedish civil society during the crisis. It provided transport, it provided 2 field hospitals, it provided personnel to different government agencies. So on balance, I would say that the support for defense expenditures has actually increased during the pandemic, because it caused an awareness that even the unexpected or black swans could happen, be it armed attack or be it cyber attacks or being a pandemic. That's a way of introduction.
Paul, I am not aware of yet whether any of the 2 other panelists are on board. Can I get a word on that? I think we are still waiting. Let us then continue with the global security situation. I will also mention to those who are listening in at this webinar, the seminar, that you are most welcome to post questions. Please write them in the chat, and I will then get those questions. And a little bit further on in this discussion, we will take the questions. Please state your name and your organizations that you are representing. And then if you can also then, if we get all the panelists part of this, state to whom you are directing your question. But if we look at the global security situation in its way, it has changed over the last 4 years. Particularly if you look at both Europe, but also in respect of the United States. Could you say something about in which way you have thought within the defense group that have kept those discussions around, levels of budget and necessity of modernizing and increasing the military defense, but also the civil defense in Sweden?
Certainly. I mean, I think we should be frank and honest and say that we're having a much more serious and complicated security environment than we had 5-10 years ago. I think that the wake-up call was Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea and its acts of war and aggression in eastern Ukraine. And that kind of caused an alarm bell for us, and we realized that we had to invest more into our armed forces. And we say in the Swedish Defense Commission report that the risk of an armed attack against Sweden cannot be excluded. And so that's one thing, that the kinetic stuff and the military hardware and so forth that we really need to invest in after having underinvested into our armed forces for decades, in all honesty. At the same time, I think it's also fair to say that we today have a multifaceted security environment. So we both have the risk for an armed attack, and we need to take those measures to strengthen the ability to withstand an armed attack, including investing into civil defense. At the same time, we also have these kind of gray zone sets or hybrid threats that you talk a lot about. It could be such as disinformation operations, cyber attacks, illicit business activities into our foreign direct investment into critical infrastructure. So we really have a complicated security environment to grapple with. I think also, especially, I mean, the driver, we should also be frank with, is at least on the military side, is the way that Russia acts. We notice it has a low threshold for the use of military force. It has indeed attacked 2 neighboring states in Georgia and Ukraine during the last decade. We see that it has a rather aggressive exercise pattern in the Baltic Sea, and we of course take note of the fact that it's more than doubled its defense expenditures and also its military capabilities during these last decades. And these are all drivers for us to invest more into our armed forces. So it's a complicated security environment that we're exposed to at the time, and we need to have 2 thoughts in our head at the same time, both to handle the hybrid threats and the kinetic and the military threats, I would say.
Of course, Sweden do have closer and closer ties with NATO, but also direct discussions with the United States. Yet the United States and the political situation there, has that been of any concern?
Well, I think it has been absolutely vital to strengthen the bilateral ties with the United States. We have a statement of intent with the United States since 2016. We also work on a trilateral basis with the United States, Sweden, and Finland. I think having the United States actively engaged into Northern Europe and strengthening a transatlantic link is of pivotal importance for our security these days. In the end, it's only the United States and NATO, to my mind, that really has the ability to deter any risk of aggression against European borders. And it's only NATO has that mission. And if you look at the defense bill as well, I think it's quite rather explicit in a few ways, both the fact that we talk about Sweden having the ability to handle an armed attack within 3 months, and after that we expect some kind of support from other countries or organizations. We also say the fact that if one Nordic or EU country is attacked, it will affect all of us. I think there is an increasing awareness that we're all part of the same security complex in the Nordic Baltic region.
I'm not sure whether Kalle Olsson is part of this now. Can you hear us, and can we hear you?
I can hear you, Marika. I'm not sure if you hear me, but that would be a great success.
We can hear you now, and Paul have given some background to the next step, how this bill will be tabled within the parliament, and also some thoughts regarding the security situation that is of concern to Sweden. I added a question regarding the political situation in the United States over the last 4 years, and having a close relationship to United States and its military capacity. Is there anything you would like to add? Is there of any concern?
Well, I guess it's fair to say that we live in turbulent times right now. We've seen an election result from the United States for Sweden and for the Nordic countries, and as for Europe as a whole, it's extremely important that we have a good relationship with the administration in Washington, regardless of which party has the presidency. From the Swedish government, there's been a clear signal that we will, of course, work closely with the coming administration, because it's a pivotal importance for Sweden and for the Nordic countries in Europe that we have these good and solid relationships with the United States. But it's a turbulent time, as we all know, and we just have to wait and see the outcome of everything.
I'm getting some messages here. We still don't have Allan on board, but we will continue for a while, and then we will record a separate interview with Allan and add to this recorded webinar. If we then go straight into the defense budget and what is needed, could we just look at, there are multifaceted skills and capacity that is needed to do this upgrade within the military force, defense force in Sweden. Which are the biggest challenges, would you say, regarding organization, hardware and software? If we start with organization. And maybe we should let Kalle start off then.
Okay, thank you. Well, there's of course many challenges with regarding this. I would say, I mean, first of all, I think we all should have to be aware of that the armed forces in Sweden for many years was rigged for reductions, for cutting costs, and that's a big thing, just to really to shift focus into growth, and that will put us towards several different challenges. I mean, one of course is personnel, to get the adequate numbers of officers and also soldiers to really fill up the army and the defense forces.
Can you give the numbers that are perceived for the future? Well,
the organization is planned to grow from 60,000 to 90,000 2025. So it's a really big, and I mean, in analogy with that, you need the basic materials for the soldiers, you need the trucks, the logistics, everything surrounding that. So I mean, it's a really big commitment that we're now doing.
Paul, would you like to add?
No, I agree. I think personnel is going to be a key factor to getting officers, especially lieutenants and majors and so forth, to be out on the regiments and filling up those new military garrisons that we're establishing to assure personnel there. And then I think also to provide the possibility actually for the Swedish Armed Forces to grow geographically, we have to look over the laws and regulations that stipulates on possibilities for the Swedish Armed Forces to exercise and establish new garrison. But I think the key to it is actually what Kalle alluded to. That's actually culture and the fact that you have to change the mindset when you before have been focused on reduction and now you're actually focused on growing and expansion. Of course, that's going to be focusing another mindset among the Swedish officer corps. I know that the Swedish Armed Forces are hungry and eager to grapple with this challenge.
And apart from that, you spoke about the geographical challenges as well. One big increase will be at Gotland in the Baltic Sea. Where are the other places where there will be new regiments placed?
Well, we're gonna, if the bill goes through, which I do expect it to do, we're gonna establish a new artillery regiment in the county of Värmland in Kristinehamn. We're establishing a new infantry regiment in Falun, and then we're establishing a new regiment in Sollefteå with a detachment in Sollefteå. In Östersund. So there are quite a few. I think those locations are also based on the need for a supply from the west to the east. I think the bill is quite explicit with this, ensuring supply lines from Norway through Sweden and into the Baltics.
And apart from that, there are also procurements of weapons, of upgrading Air Force capacity. Could you tell us about that and what are the plans for these acquisitions and where will you look? Mm-hmm. Maybe both of you can have a word on that one.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, there's a substantial increase also on the procurement side. As you know, we're right now in the process of installing the Patriot missiles, as we have people over in the United States undergoing training, and those Patriot batteries will be established soon. Then, of course, we have air-to-air missiles we're investing to. We also, in the defense bill, is indicated that we're going to procure 2 new corvettes and then an additional start the production defining process for two other. We have, of course, midlife upgrades on our submarines. We are, in fact, establishing at least 1 more army brigade as well. So, I mean, there are substantial increases in the procurement process in the years to come due to the fact that we're increasing our defense expenditure so quickly. And I mean, we're going to go from 1% up to 1.5% within the next 4 years. I think that's an historic increase for Sweden that happened during the last 70 years. My only concern, but I can get back to that, is the risk of underfinancing. But I can end up. That's, I think, where the fault line is going a little bit right now in the Swedish defense policy.
Let us come back to that in a moment. If you, Kalle, could give us an idea of how you see the procurement system, how will it take place, and who will be the persons or the countries or the defense organizations, companies that might be part of the future?
Well, I guess in addition to what Paul just said, we can also add that the Air Force current fighter, the JAS 39CD version, will be maintained. And as the new JAS 39E version will be integrated into the squadrons and become operational. And this allows the Air Force to keep its 6 fighter squadrons, and the development of the next generation fighter aircraft will also commence. And maybe that relates to your question there, Marika. We see the need to also look forward into the longer future, so to speak, when it comes to development of new platforms, especially since Sweden has been really a driving force when it comes to developing new really advanced platforms, at not least the Gripen platform. And that is a cooperation that we are engaging in among with Britain mainly when it comes to the fighter platform for the future. And then we have, of course, have other projects that are of certain concern for our national security. Submarines, as Paul mentioned, we have a midlife upgrade, and then we have the A26 new version coming up in the following years.
The part of the defense budget and the bill that will be going through most likely in December also mentioned the need for upgrading the home guard. We will come back to the cyber threat in a moment, but the home guard, can you explain the role of the home guard? To some it might sound a bit old-fashioned to put that as part of the very much of our defense future. Why the home guard is important to the Swedish Defense Force?
Well, let me say like this: we use the home guard when we do the mobilization in order to protect and make sure that the mobilization of the Swedish Armed Forces can go as planned. So that's kind of like the core mission of it. Let me also say that the average age of the home guard has been sinking for every year, and I think that we have some platoons and companies within the home guard that are really competent and sharp. I think also that the home guard has an important mission to play in these kind of gray zone situations when you use them to protect different facilities. We know that the risk for sabotage in the situation just before an armed attack can be very, very critical. So I actually see a growing need for the home guard, and we're also investing into the home guard now in this forthcoming defense bill as well, in order for it to be able to handle the challenges for example, when it's dark and so forth, its ability to continue fighting. So the home guard is important. It's also represented in all the Swedish counties, and it's something that a lot of people have a close attachment to the Swedish Armed Forces with. We have about 40 battalions of them, and they're increasingly important, I would say.
Kalle Olsson, would you like to add something there?
Yeah, I could maybe add that the importance of the home guard, it goes beyond the strict military side of it. It's also a very important connection between it establishes an important connection between the military, the armed forces, and the society as a whole. In Sweden, we talk about folkförankring. Maybe I don't know really the word in English, folkförankring, but
connection to the people, maybe.
Yes, maybe the connection between the agency, the armed forces, and the people. I mean, we have a history in Sweden with the total defense concept, and the home guard really is one of the backbones in this concept.
Okay, I want to just go back then to the cyber threat, a growing concern all over the world, and particularly when it comes to disinformation, when it comes to impact on the political situation in countries, but also the fact that if the internet goes down, we are all very, very vulnerable. Now, when it comes to the cyber threat, what are the biggest concerns, and in which way have you within the group who have looked into this new defense budget and the bill, what thoughts have you had with you, and what are you most happy with?
Should I go first, or do you
let Kalle start now.
Yeah, please do.
Okay. Well, I think this is one of the really big challenges when we look forward. I mean, often when we have these kinds of discussions or debates, we tend very much to focus on the military aspects of it. And it's fully understandable, but I think that all the threats that you call them, maybe gray zone aggression or hybrid warfare, or whatever you want to call it, that's really something that we really need to focus on more and more, because if we say that when we talk about the risk for an armed attack against Sweden, we talk about probabilities. We say in this bill, we cannot exclude it, the risk. We cannot exclude the risk. When it comes to these types of gray zone activities, cyber threats, disinformation, etc., it's something that's happening today, tomorrow, every day. It's a clear and present threat. So we have to see it as that, and we have to take measures to really fight it. And I don't think, to be honest, that you can find any open liberal democracy today that is fully set up to really face to meet these problems today, these threats. I don't think that you can say that you put one agency in charge of everything and then it will be fixed. You have to have a whole society approach where you include agencies, municipalities, all Swedes, so to speak, must be involved in this work, especially when it comes to the cyber threat. So this is something that we obviously put a lot of effort in, put a lot of money in. We have to have both a military cyber defense, and we have to have a more civilian cyber defense. And we are working right now quite intense, I would say, with these questions.
Well, I think Kalle nailed it when he said that this is actually not a threat, but it's an ongoing challenge that we are exposed to 24/7. We know this kind of advanced persistent threats or these sophisticated cyber attacks from other countries are increasing in strength and magnitude on almost a daily basis. The challenge we have in Sweden is that we have a growing gap between digitalization and cybersecurity. When other organizations measure our score on digitalization, we tend to score, top 3, top 4 in the world. When it comes to cybersecurity, we don't score as well. I think we had some challenges on cybersecurity in Sweden. One is that we have a lot of agencies involved that working on cybersecurity, and they tend to be very preoccupied with coordinating each other. And now the way of handling this is, of course, that we will pool and share resources in the Cyber Operations Center. And I'm a strong advocate of that. And we learn from the Brits, for example, who established the Cyber Operations Center. I think it's very important. I think on cyber as well, it's very important to have a private-public partnership. A lot of these kind of activities connected to critical infrastructures are in the hands of private companies. You need to have a flow of information between the private sector and the public sector, and being able to warn when companies that do have things that are connected to critical infrastructure are exposed to espionage or attacks, they need to find out about it. And I think that is something that the security services need to provide the information for. And finding this balance and partnership with the private sector has been somewhat of a challenge for us due to the construction of our legal system. I think it's absolutely crucial. Last thing on cybersecurity, if you want to be really, really good at cybersecurity, you need to combine it with signal intelligence. And the Swedish intelligence FRA, is a Swedish radio establishment. They do a lot of good jobs on increasing our security there as well. And the armed forces are also advancing their capabilities in the last 2-3 years. So things are going in the right trajectory, but we still have a growing gap between being extremely early adopters and digital, and a little bit the security coming secondary. And as the security environment goes in the digital arena, that's unsustainable in the long run.
Well, one would say that the awareness have grown by the minute for the last couple of years, maybe regarding the threats, the cyber threats on all levels of society. As you mentioned, the private and public relationship between finding a way forward. So on that note, you want to comment anything on the fact that we have now halted the 5G network establishment in Sweden because of the issues that you just mentioned?
Well, let me say like this. I think that the bill that was presented in the parliament was actually quite good, because it allowed for the possibility to take the security policy implications of 5G into consideration, and therefore the Swedish Armed Forces and the Swedish Security Service SÄPO was allowed to present their case, or the concern that they have about, having the wrong providers of this 5G technology. Now the appeal was made to the court. According to the parliament, the appeal from SÄPO and the Swedish Armed Forces, to our mind, should be made to the government to make final decisions about security and defense policies. It shouldn't be made in the court. That would be my only criticism of the legislation as it was adopted. But I think on balance, I think it was good statements by both the Swedish Armed Forces and SÄPO in this regard, because this is, of course, the 5G is going to be the central nerve system and how we're going to live our lives in the future. Everything from autonomous vehicles to factories and smart cities, it's all going to be based on the 5G technology, and therefore you have to take the security aspect of it, but also the integrity aspect of the 5G into due consideration.
Kalle, would you like to add something to that note?
Well, not about really the court issue. It's a process, and we just have to wait and see. But I just want to underscore what Paul said last year, that the development of connected things, Internet of Things, 5G, AE, all of this really just underscores the importance that we have a robust and secure infrastructure in regards of 5G. And I think also that the government, and that we have heard from other countries that are looking at Sweden right now, and is also drawing inspiration when they are modeling their own legislation in this regard.
We just would like to all those who are present at the webinar to know that Allan Widman's technical problems with his computer has not been solved, but he will be interviewed at a later stage, and his comments will be added to this webinar that will be then available on the platform. I will give you the details of that a little bit later on. You can also find it at Rud Pedersen's homepage and other home pages. We will give you that information. One question that has come from somebody in the audience, I've not got the name or the organization, but the question is as follows. The Swedish government just decided about a review about the principles of defense material acquisition. What changes can we expect in coming years? Will there be more, less competitive procurement, is a question. Would you comment to that? Do you have a comment to that? That was part of what I raised a bit earlier.
Sure. Do you want me to start, or you want? I can say a few words about it, because
you are so kind. Paul, you can start, and then we let Kalle continue.
Okay, sorry. Well, I think this review is going to be very important, actually. Our procurement strategy was actually adopted in 2009, and that was adopted during a completely different security environment. I think in these days, if you deduct the conclusion from the Swedish Defense Commission that an armed attack can't be excluded, you have to think much more in terms of security of supply, both in peace but also in crisis and also in situations of war. So I think security of supply will be one of the aspects that this government review will have to take into consideration. I think it's also going to take into consideration what we call this vital security interest, the VSE in Swedish, and that's the underwater domain and the aeronautics domain, and how we're gonna fulfill the obligations that we have on those two sectors. I think it's important also that we have a dynamic R&D community, that if we decide that these two domains are of special interest to Swedish national security, we also have to assure that we have the necessary government fundings for, as I said, research and technology and investment into these domains. A third aspect I think is going to be important for this review is going to be the increasing, expanding EU cooperations when it comes to material acquisitions and when it comes to defense industrial cooperation. We have almost a new landscape here with the PESCO projects, the defense funds, and also this card review of the armed forces in Europe. And I think an important object is also going to be how we can use this European process to add value also to the strengthening the Swedish armed forces. So a very important government review and very timely, since it was over a decade ago since we had the last review of this procurement strategy.
Kalle, how soon do you think this will be an announcement or an idea what this defense, what the review will decide?
Well, I think
or put forward.
I think we can expect announcement in the, I guess, in the quite near future. It's obviously a very important question, because a lot of the money that we now put in is directed to different types of projects that we know tends to, unfortunately, quite often become more expensive than we first have planned for. So it's very important that we really try to get a grip on this. That's also been a clear signal from the government. We need to obviously look more into the supply chain. We need a more robust supply chain. We also need to, as Paul mentioned, look for the possibility to gain added value within the corporations that we have, both within the EU and with other partner countries. I mentioned the development of the future fighter aircraft that we're looking into with the UK. So yeah, I guess that's what I can say.
And that would directly lead then to the issue that you raised earlier, Paul, regarding the underfunding of the equipment, the hardware that's needed.
Sure. Yeah, let me just say, from having spent 100 hours this spring in negotiations with the Ministry of Defense on the forthcoming defense decision, that the most complicated issues are related to material acquisitions. These are connections that have it's very complicated. It's related to the security of supply. It's related to export control. It's related to the company's ability to export and also share cost. It's related to establishing international users group and so forth. So I think this aspect also of the competitiveness of the Swedish defense industrial base has to be taken into consideration when we do this governmental review. I mean, those products that we produce by ourselves, and if we can't export them, they become awfully expensive because you can't share cost. But if you get bigger user groups, like for example we have the CV90 or we have the Gripen family in Eastern Europe, then it's actually can be very successful, because then you have a lot of countries who are willing to invest into it. So I think export and the conditions for export has to be also one factor taken into consideration when it comes to this government inquiry about our procurement plan. Now, underfunding, it's the moderate position together with the Christian Democrats, also the Swedish Democrats, is that we would like to see the trajectory of the defense expenditures also increase during 2026 and 2027 with the plus 5 billion and then another 5 billion there on the way up to 2% of GDP. We had a long tradition in Sweden, unfortunately, of underfunding our defense decisions. I think that the decision in 2015 probably was the worst of all. And it's better to have a good balance between means and ends in the start. Otherwise, you tend to fool yourself if you see costs popping up on the way, and it becomes much more difficult to materialize the ambition you have. So our key objectives during the whole negotiations has been trying to assure that we don't have another underfunded defense bill, because that is to the detriment of the Swedish armed forces and also to the Swedish political system if we have another of these defense decisions.
Kalle, would you like to add something to that? That is, even now talking about beyond 2025?
Yes, you all know that's been one of the discussions and debates during this process. I mean, we have a system with the 5-year defense, a proposal that includes a 5-year period. We have said from the government side that that's what we are willing to do at this moment, especially in these very difficult times concerning the COVID-19, the fiscal strains that has put on the whole, the economy as a whole, compared to many other aspects. A 5-year plan is quite a long time if you compare it to other areas that we fund. But of course, I think we have a very good base with this defense bill when we are looking forward into 2030 and the next defense bill coming up 2026 to continue what we now have started.
If I ask
yes.
If I ask your challenge, Kalle, a little bit there, and what I think we should keep in mind, yes, we have a substantial increase of 40%, and it's absolutely necessary because it's the fault of both sides of the aisle that we have underinvested into our defense, especially in relation to how the security environment has gone sour. But just to start off, we are currently the country in the whole Northern Europe who are investing the least of our economy into the defense. We have about 1.1% of GDP. I see all the surrounding countries being up. I see Finland reaching 2% next year. I see Norway investing 1.7%, having a trajectory of up to 2% and so forth. So I think it's necessary that we invest into the long term in defense, and we have some catching up to, because other neighboring states are investing more than we have so far.
Let us go back then to the current proposal, which also includes a large chunk of money to go to the civil defense. We have also on that level decreased our capacity for a number of years, and what could you, Kalle, say is the most important part of the civil defense that you can read out of this budget? How will it be spent? What is most needed? Is it as easy to talk about that as to talk about what kind of hardware, organizational skills that are needed?
I think maybe that civil defense is in one way even more complicated and even more complex, because here we are not talking about just only one or a handful of agencies. We're talking about many agencies, the whole of Sweden, the whole of the society that in one way or another needs to be involved in the reestablishment of the civil defense. And as you said, Marika, we have made, there's been really big decreases or reductions. We almost abolished, to be frank, the civil defense in Sweden in the 90s and in the early, in the years between around the millennium. So I mean, the work here is even greater, I would say, and in many ways even more complicated. And I mean, we have some obvious areas that really needs to be strengthened. We have healthcare, we have food and water supply, transportation, law enforcement and security, financial preparedness, energy supply. The list can be quite long if you want to. Cybersecurity, of course. So here it's also a matter of that you need a political you need to prioritize politically what you need to do, because the needs are very big. But at the same time, we're now doing the biggest spending on civil defense in modern times. So I mean, it's very good that what we're doing right now, but the needs are huge, to be frank. And we also need to see the connection between the military and the civilian defense, of course. And the military and the armed forces, they are very clear that in order for them to do their job, they need a functioning and robust civil defense, especially, as I just mentioned, when it comes to energy, when it comes to transportation, when it comes to healthcare, and so forth. You need the civil defense, and you need the civil society to really step up to also meet the armed forces needs.
Paul, what would you like to add there?
Well, I pretty much agree with most of the things that Kalle said. I think that we should also have a high level of ambition, and I think that the ambition should be that we should, if your society has the ability to handle an armed attack, focusing on civil defense, your resilience against all other kinds of threats and vulnerabilities will also increase. So that's why I think the focus should be on civil defense and not necessarily societal security, because there's a different legal framework to it as well. The other thing, as Kalle also said, which I think I completely agree with, is that the armed forces are very much dependent on civil society in one way or another functioning during a case of an armed attack. Our armed forces are very small today, thus we're needing support when it comes to energy, transport, healthcare, and things like that. I think one of the most challenging things for when we building up a civil defense again, that's kind of like the most comprehensive thing a state can actually undertake. Assuring secure communication is something we have to invest in quite direly in the forthcoming years, so you can communicate between the armed forces, our 21 regions who do healthcare, and our 290 municipalities and our 47 different agencies who in one way or another are connected to civil defense. Just to give you a picture on how complicated these matches are, but they're very important, because just as Kalle said, we downside our armed forces, but we almost annihilated the civil defense. So there will be a long and important journey.
Now, the issue of communication became apparent during the heavy forest fires that we experienced a few years ago, where it was impossible to actually communicate in a good and rapid way. I would like to remind everybody who's listening that it's absolutely possible to ask some questions if you want. Put them in the chat and they will be forwarded to me, and I will then post them to our two panelists. While we are waiting maybe for one or two more questions, I would like you to basically start to wrap up. On the 15th of December, this bill will most likely be tabled. That is a biggest increase in defense spending that Sweden has seen in many, many years, over 70 years actually. And the focus is both on military upgrade, organizational upgrade, and the civil defense within Sweden. So before we're wrapping up, waiting for some questions, were Sweden, if you look back in the mirror, in the back mirror, were we in this part of the world or in Sweden naive to do what we did when we basically demontaged both the civil defense capacity and the military capacity? And I can start maybe with Kalle and then Paul. Very briefly.
Yes, we were naive, I would say. sitting here in Östersund, one of the big garrison cities in Sweden, or wrong, we were one of the big garrison cities. Now we will start to rebuild it also here in Östersund. I think one of the big lessons when we look forward now is not to keep a steady course and not to be not to just reshift if we see better times coming when it comes to, well, for example, Russia, that we keep a steady course and that we don't do these very rapid shifts in our defense. It's hugely important because, as we all can see, annihilating the civil defense, as Paul said, or really reduct our military defense, it's something that you can do quite fast, but rebuilding it takes time and a lot of effort and a lot of money. So yes, I don't want to sit here and point finger at the politicians in the 90s or whatever, but I think that it's obviously we went too far in the reductions. Yes.
Paul, would you like to add something?
Yeah. I mean, it's not an excuse, but possibly an explanation, is that we follow the pattern of a lot of other European countries, except for the Poland and the Baltic countries. I always said there was no one west of Warsaw who wanted to listen to their assessment of Russia. And I think, in all honesty, we know now that they were wrong, and they were right and we were wrong on our reading about the security environment. It went too far, and now we have to invest into building the armed forces up again. And the challenges for us, of course, also particularly difficult for Sweden, is that we are the third largest country in Europe to defend, and we're not anchored in any kind of defense alliance with mutual defense obligations or commitments. So that is made, and we're at an intersection also between where NATO and Russia interacts, so to speak. So that are some of the challenges that we're exposed to.
So we are now going to ask you to give us just one or two sentences as a conclusion. Allan Widman, of course, one of the most long-standing politicians who have worked with defense issues, have not been able to be with us due to technical problems. It would have been interesting to hear his views on the decisions that were taken in the 90s and early 20th century, 2020 or 2000, so to speak. In the interview with him, I'm sure some of those issues will, of course, to look a little bit back in the back mirror. This webinar will be possible to look at the recorded version at politicalfestival.eu. And one would say that what you have now achieved is quite a remarkable compromise between the government and opposition, maybe with this bill. I think, would you like to start off, Paul, to give your final remarks? If we are not getting any more questions in here, I'm just going to look if there's something that's coming in. No, nothing has come in yet. So
Okay.
Your final remarks, is this a remarkable compromise that has been achieved?
Mm-hmm. I'll go against my instincts and try to be brief. I think that we have a pretty much a consensus on the level of expenditures and the direction of the decisions we're going to take up to 2025. But then we have other slightly higher ambitions for the years 26 and 27 when it comes to defense expenditures and giving the Swedish Armed Forces a long-term perspective. I think that's the fault line goals. 3 sentences I would like to end up with. First, we have a new normal, a new security environment in the Baltic Sea, and we're in for the long haul. I don't see the security environment shining up for Sweden anytime soon. I think we have to prepare this being a marathon rather than a sprinter race. That this is the security environment, I think, is pretty much going to be here to stay, unfortunately. Secondly, I see two fault lines in Swedish security and defense policy today. First one being on defense expenditures. Those five parties was committed to a 2% target of GDP in defense expenditures. I felt that during the negotiations that was one of the fault lines. Those also want to have a trajectory up to 2% of GDP. Secondly, being if Sweden should join NATO or not. I think this is something where the parliament is split within 4 parties on yes and 4 parties on no, and we know also the public is split. I see those two fault lines shaping a lot of the security policy discussions in the year to come, so to speak. I'll stop. And needless to say, I'm a strong advocate of Sweden joining NATO. If there was anyone who had hesitation about that, I'll end it.
Paul Johnson, thank you for those final remarks. And then Kalle Olsson, you will then close this webinar.
Okay. Well, first of all, as I missed the introduction, I just want to say thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this discussion. I think it was a very fruitful discussion, and also that I feel, and I think Paul can agree upon that we all have a responsibility also to try to really discuss. And
we're losing you there now, I'm afraid.
Oh, you can't hear me?
No, please repeat those last few words.
All right. Well, I just want to say that I think it's very important that we have these kinds of discussions and that we try within our area, defense politics, to really try to get out and get the word out. But what we are doing, this really historical proposal that we're now putting forward to Parliament is something quite unique in a Swedish context. It's important that people know what we're doing both within Sweden and abroad. I think we have quite a few challenges ahead of us. We've been touching upon some of them. You couldn't really underestimate the challenges that needs to go into really to absorb and to materialize the money that now goes into the armed forces, especially. That will be quite a big challenge, I think. And then I think also that we need to focus more and more on how to really get this total defense concept to work. We have to really see that civil defense and military defense, as we've been talking about earlier, needs to go together and work together in order for us to get a really strong and effective defense looking forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, both of you. Paul Jonsson, from Moderaterna, and Kalle Olsson, Socialdemokraterna. Och Allan Widman, he's not with us, but he will be recorded later and added to this webinar. And you will be able to both share it with other interested parties and, of course, look into it again at politicalfestival.eu. And I think with that, we would like to say thank you and welcome back to participate in another topic, or maybe we come back at another stage once the bill has been tabled in the Swedish Parliament. Thank you very much.
Thank you.